Genesis chapter 33, continuing our study in Genesis. Last time we saw where Esau was leaving Laban's. He was going to go travel back to Canaan. He was going to have to encounter Esau, and he was scared for his life, and for good reason, because before he had left Canaan for Laban's, he had lied and cheated Esau out of his blessing. Esau was so mad that he said he wanted to kill him. And Jacob's mother told him to escape to Laban's for two reasons. Number one, to escape from Esau. And number two, to find a wife. So he went and he married Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. He served Laban for I think over 20 years, something like that. And then he's coming back. He leaves Laban. Laban was upset because he left unannounced, and now he has another problem on his hands. He's going to encounter his brother Esau. So chapter 33. Actually, before we start reading, what we saw was last week when he was on his way on his journey, he decided to split up his group into two parts. In case Esau attacked, Esau would kill or destroy half of them. Half of them would be spared. So that was his reasoning. And he decided to present all of these animals as gifts to Esau to appease his wrath. And so they've been doing that. And now in chapter 33, we're going to continue. It says, "And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him how many men? 400 men. Can you imagine Jacob? He sees Esau approaching with 400 men. And the Bible says that Esau was a hunter of the field. He was a hairy man. So you can imagine Esau, the type of guys that he's going to have accompanying him are probably going to be similar to him. That's the kind of guys, that's the crowd that he's going to run with. That's his family, and they're probably going to be like him. And so Jacob is probably scared to death. Imagine seeing 400 men coming with your brother who had wanted to kill you because you stole his blessing. Imagine what he must have been thinking, must have been shaking to death. And so what happens is Esau runs to meet Jacob, hugs him and kisses him, and they both weep together. What a ironic or unexpected encounter. Let's continue reading verse 2. "And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times, 7 being the number of completion in the Bible, until he came near to his brother." Verse 4, "And Esau ran to meet him." Now I wonder what he thought when he saw Esau running and charging. He's like, "Oh!" Do you think Esau was rushing him to attack him and beat him up and kill him? And it says Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. A reunion. Isn't that interesting? Reconciliation. You know, that's kind of like what happened with the prodigal son when he returned back to the father. He's coming back home. He's all ashamed. He's embarrassed. He's sorry. And he comes back. "Oh, Dad. Oh, I sinned against Father, and I sinned against heaven. I sinned against you. And boy, I'm just such a miserable son. I'm not even worthy to be called your son. Can you please receive me back as a servant? I'll be one of the servants." And what do? They throw a party for him. They throw a celebration. And he hugs him and kisses him and, "Oh, son, welcome home. Welcome home." Now that's a picture of God receiving a child of God back into fellowship. He's always there. Now, what happens after this, Esau is introduced to Jacob's family. Verse 5, "And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, Who are those with thee? And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near, and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near, and Rachel, and they bowed themselves." Remember all those animals that Jacob was trying to give Esau as gifts to bribe him, to appease his wrath? He ends up convincing Esau to receive the animals Go look at verse 8. And he said, "What meanest thou by all this drove which I met?" That word drove means a flock or a herd. And he said, "These are to find grace in the sight of my Lord." And Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself." And Jacob said, "Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face, as though I had seen the face of God." Boy, that's a compliment. "And thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." And he urged him, and he took it. Then Jacob tells Esau, he says, to go ahead of him, and tells him he's going to meet him at Seir, which is the land where Esau was dwelling in Edom. And so he basically tells him Esau wants him to follow him, and says, "Okay, let's travel together." And Jacob basically says, "Well, you know what? I have women, I have kids, and we can't really keep up with you. We're just going to take our time. Why don't you go first, and we're going to travel behind you, and we're going to just take our time, and we'll catch up with you, and I'll meet you in Seir." Look at verse 14. "Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir." But what's interesting is Jacob never goes to Seir. Now, either he was lying, or he changed his mind, or circumstances changed, or whatever reason, but he ends up not going to Seir. If you go look at verse 17, "And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built in him an house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place was called Succoth." Verse 18, "And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padam Aram, and pitched his tent before the city." And so it never mentions that he goes to Seir. Look at verse 19. "And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent, at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar, and called it El Elohe Israel." That phrase there means God, the God of Israel. So, that's chapter 33. Why he didn't go to Seir, I don't know. But what happens with where he does end up is trouble, especially for his daughter. Chapter 34. What happens is Jacob's daughter, Dinah, gets into some trouble. And Dinah is the only daughter that the Bible mentions Jacob having. Whether he had other daughters beside her, remember I showed you where the Bible does call other people daughters, but it looks like they were probably daughters-in-law, not his immediate biological daughters. So it appears, based on the names of all the sons that his wives had, that Dinah was the only daughter that he had. Look at chapter 34, verse 1. We're going to see that Jacob's daughter Dinah goes out to see the other girls in her area. It says, "And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land." Okay, I'm going to have to compete with this hammering. I might have to, if I start talking a little bit more loudly, it's because I'm trying to compete with that banging sound. Dinah goes out to meet the other girls in her area. Why? It doesn't say. What was she doing? It doesn't say. Was it a bad thing? Possibly. There's this city there and these other daughters of the land. They're the daughters of Canaan. They're probably not good Christian girls that she's going out to associate with. She's probably not going out to church or to a Bible study or a fellowship or something with these other girls. She may just be curious. Now, most of the commentators who do these chronologies and they try to figure out the ages, she is likely in her early teens, Dinah, at this point. And so there's some sort of attraction where she is curious and she wants to go out and maybe mingle with these other girls, maybe interact with them, maybe meet some friends or partake in some of the activities that they are doing. But she gets into trouble. Her curiosity gets the best of her. And what happens is Shechem the son of a prominent figure, his father is Hamer, who is a prince of the city, he takes Dinah and he defiles her. Look at verse 2. And when Shechem, the son of Hamer, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. Notice it says he saw her, number 1. He took her, number 2. And he lay with her, number 3. The Bible talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So you have the lust of the flesh. He lay with her. Lust of the eyes, he saw her. Pride of life, he took her. Those 3. We see that all through the Bible with the temptation of Eve in the garden, with the temptation that Satan presented to Jesus Christ in the wilderness, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And the Bible says, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. After those 3, bam, he defiled her. Now, what's interesting about this is, when she was in this city, it says that he took her. And do you remember when Abraham and Sarah were in Egypt and Pharaoh took Sarah? And then again when they were in Gerar and Abimelech wanted to take Sarah? And remember when Isaac and Rebekah encountered a similar scenario where Abimelech took Rebekah? You see, so they go into these foreign lands, and it appears that these prominent figures, in this case his dad was a prince, and in the other instances they were kings, they were leaders. It looks like if there are strangers sojourning in their land, that they have the power to just take whatever they want for themselves. And the prevailing view of this is that he raped her. That is the prevailing view. There are some other that teach no, it was consensual. But most people will say, no, he forced himself upon her based on the language and based on the reaction of her brothers. And notice, if you're familiar with the chapter, and you will be familiar after we finish this chapter today, that Dinah is never blamed or criticized for any of these actions. Now, if it was consensual, and if she was a willing participant, wouldn't she be at fault also? At least partly. You could say, well, yeah, but I mean, he took advantage of her. Okay, but if it was consensual, it seems like she would have been blamed in some point in this, but she never is. So that's the prevailing view. There are some things in this chapter that make it look like, well, wait a minute, but if that's true, then why this? That doesn't make sense. And at first glance, I will admit, it doesn't seem to make sense. But I'm going to show you some other scriptures that are going to possibly shed some light on this. I am not teaching one way or the other that this is exactly what it was, but I'm going to show you some verses that will support the prevailing view, even though I'm not saying exactly that's what happened. I'll let you form your own opinion. But let's go through this and look what the Bible says based with some other scriptures and things. And hopefully you'll be able to understand this a little bit better. What's interesting is, and what presents sort of a dilemma or a problem here, or a little bit of confusion, is that afterward he desires to marry her. All right, so look at verse 3. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamer, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. It is possible that this guy, because of who his father was a prince in this city, it's possible that this guy was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. You ever seen maybe a video or on the news or something, these celebrities or somebody who has a father who's a big political figure, and they get pulled over by the police for a DUI or something, and the girl says, some celebrity or somebody, don't you know who I am? Don't you know who my father is? And the cop says, I don't care who your father is. She says, well, you better care. You're going to lose your job. You're going to be in big trouble. That could have been his mindset, like, well, I'm the son of so-and-so. I mean, I can do whatever I want. I'm above the law. I can do this and get away with it. And maybe that's why he did this and thought that he could get away with it. And then afterward, he's not afraid of any repercussions. He doesn't think that he maybe did anything wrong. So he goes and he still wants to be with her. And it says that he actually wants to marry her. And he asks his dad, now why is he asking his father? At that time, the parents were very instrumental in the decision-making of their children's spouses. And still is sometimes in some places in some cultures today. Remember I told you, a lot of times when you're reading this, you have to understand the cultural context of these events in the Bible, because a lot of times it is very foreign to our modern American culture. And I'm going to show you some other things about that have to do with that. And you're probably thinking, well, this, why would he want to marry her, and why would he think that he even has a chance of marrying her? Why would she want to marry him after that, if it is true that he defiled her? Now, I want to show you a few things about how the parents were very involved in the selection of their children's spouses. Do you remember Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac? Do you remember in Judges when Samson saw a woman that he liked and he asked his parents to go and get her for him? You're thinking, well, what's the problem? Isn't this Samson? I thought he was just big, macho man. Why can't he go and do it himself? Doesn't he have enough confidence? Well, culture. Do you remember Tamar, David's daughter? What happened with that? I'm going to show you something about that, because that is a little bit similar. It has to do with this instance here, and I'm going to tell you why. A woman at this time, especially a young Hebrew woman, was expected to be a virgin when she got married. Here, she's defiled. She's no longer a virgin. And so that, at that time, was a reproach to a woman. And it lessened her chances of getting married. And I want you to look at 2 Samuel chapter 13. Because if you're thinking, which when I first read this, I was thinking, wait a minute. Why would this guy think that he even has a chance of marrying her after what he did to her? Why would he think that she would be willing to marry him? Who would want to do that? If the prevailing viewpoint is correct, this guy should have gone to jail. He should be punished. Not think that he has a chance to marry her. Who would want to be married to a jerk like that? But look what this says in 2 Samuel chapter 13. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, beginning at verse 11. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her and said unto her, Come lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? Well, what shame? She's innocent. He's the one who should be ashamed. But she says, no, if you do this to me, there's going to be shame brought upon me. And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Howbeit, he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. Well, that's clear as day. We know exactly that he violated her against her will. Verse 15, Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone. And she said unto him, There is no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou hast did unto me. What? How could that be worse than what he just did? That doesn't make sense in our culture, in our mindset. But let's look at something else. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 22. At this time, a woman who could not get married was in a lot worse of a position than somebody today. At this time, women relied on a husband a lot of times to support them financially. And so you have to understand the cultural mindset at this time is a lot different. It doesn't make sense to us today, but at that time, a woman relied on a husband, and a lot of times marriages were prearranged. They didn't get married simply because they were madly in love with each other. A lot of times it was out of necessity, financial necessity, other things like that, for bearing children. Things were different at that time, and that's why we see these verses, and it just does not make sense to us at all. But back in these days, let me show you some other verses. It was a lot different. Marriage was, like I said, it is true in the Bible. We see, the Bible talks about man and women loving each other, husbands and wives and all that. But it was not always like it is today. Now look at Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28. If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he hath humbled her, he may not put her away all his days. So once he does that, he is responsible to marry her, to support her, to take care of her the rest of her life, and to pay money. Ultimately, though, it seems like it was the father's ultimate decision whether or not he wanted this to take place. Go to Exodus chapter 22. You know, you've heard of a shotgun wedding. Some guy gets a teenage girl pregnant, and then the old story of her father comes out after him with a gun and says, okay, you're going to marry her now. You're going to take care of her. You're going to take care of the kid. You're going to support her. If you don't marry her, I'm going to make you. I'm going to shoot you. Shotgun wedding, they call it. Back then, it was... Back then they had it, but even if she didn't get pregnant, because it was a just dishonorable thing for her to be defiled like this. Look at Exodus chapter 22. And Exodus chapter 22, let's see, I had the verse, let me go back and, oh, no wonder, I'm in Deuteronomy. Okay, here it is, Exodus chapter 22, verse 16. And if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed, and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. So ultimately it was the father who made the final decision. But this guy was obligated to go ahead and marry her and take care of her because of the deed that was done. Because he basically lessened her chances of finding a husband after he defiled her. Because the expectations that were put on young Hebrew women. And you might think, well, that's so unrealistic though. Think about having to hold such a high standard to these women to remain pure for all the way until they get married. I mean, who does that today? Well, there are more people than you think. But remember, at that time, they married younger too. They married a lot younger, sometimes in their teens. Back to Genesis chapter 34. So let's continue. Genesis chapter 34. This guy, after doing that, he says that he loves her. He wants to marry her. He is asking his father to get her for him so he can marry her. And then what happens is Shechem's father, Shechem is the one who defiled Dinah. Shechem's father, Hamor, attempts to persuade Jacob and his sons to form an alliance with him in order for the families to intermarry. So he's going to go and he's going to confront Jacob and say, here, let's make a deal and let's go ahead and make this arrangement. Look at verse 5. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it. And the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel, in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. Now, whether he forced her or whether it was consensual, it was wrong either way. Okay, that we can clearly establish, because they were not married. He did not have permission from her father. So whatever view you take, we know for sure that what he did was wrong. Verse 8, and Hamor communed with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you, give her him to wife, and make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell, trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. He's saying, hey, you guys can marry our women can marry you guys, we can have this big community, it'll be financially beneficial to both of us, we can trade, it'll boost the economy, it's a good thing, it's a win-win situation. Then he goes on, he says in verse 11, and Shechem said unto her father and unto her brethren, let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me I will give. So, what's the solution? What's going to happen? What happens is Jacob's sons pretend to agree on the condition that all the males get circumcised. Look at verse 13. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully. Okay, so what they propose, they are not serious. They are not sincere. They are answering him deceitfully. It's a trick. It's a scheme that they've planned in order to get revenge. It says, and the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah their sister, verse 14, and they said unto them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. You guys are Gentiles. You guys are uncircumcised. You need to be part of us. You need to be partake in this covenant that we've made with God. Verse 15, but in this will we consent unto you, if ye will do as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. See, but they're lying. They're saying, yeah, okay, we'll go ahead and do this. We'll go ahead with your proposal based on one condition. If all of you guys get circumcised like we are, then we can do it. But they're lying, and we're going to see that they're lying. It already said that they answered deceitfully. Keep reading, verse 16. Then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And the young man deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city, and communed with the men of their city, saying, these men are peaceable with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land, and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. So you can see that Hamor is a prince of this city, so he is very influential in persuading them to go along with this. And he's explaining how it's going to be beneficial to both sides, that they're going to benefit, that it's worth doing. And they go ahead and they go along with it. And what happens is, while the men are recovering after this surgical procedure, Simeon and Levi, they go in and they massacre all the males and take Dinah from Shechem's house. Look at verse 25. And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. All of them. Well, there was only one guy that was guilty. And maybe, you could blame his father too for kind of, trying to get her for him to marry. But they killed all of them? Was that justified? A little overboard, wouldn't you say? Verse 26. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. So it looks like this whole time Dinah is there in Shechem's house. Whether he's holding her against her will, I don't know. But they take her out of the house. Afterward, Jacob's sons go in and they spoil the city. Verse 27. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. What happens after that? Well, Jacob is going to upbraid and criticize Simeon and Levi for tarnishing his reputation and jeopardizing his safety. Look at let's continue verse 29. And all their wealth and all their little ones, they even took people. All their wealth, all their little ones, and their wives took they captive. Well, they had nothing to do with this. It wasn't their fault. Took them captive as what? I guess they're going to keep them as slaves. And spoiled even all that was in the house. Verse 30, Jacob is upset. Verse 30, and Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, ye have troubled me to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land. In other words, he's saying, you ruined my reputation. You guys, I can't believe you guys went in and did this. This is just ridiculous. The punishment does not fit the crime in this situation. And he says, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. He's saying, guess, now what? All of these people, these other civilizations and these people that are hearing about this, and believe me, they're going to hear about it, they are more numerous than we are. They're going to gang up and come and attack us and kill me because of what you guys did, because they think that I'm a threat to them. And what happens? They justified their actions by claiming to defend their sister's honor. Look at verse 31. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? So they may have had the right motive in trying to protect their sister and rescue her, but they had the wrong method. And because of this, Simeon and Levi, they later lose their birthrights because of these actions. Go to chapter 49. Later on, when Jacob is older, he's giving out these blessings, and he talks about all of his sons who become the head of the 12 tribes of Israel. Look what he says to Simeon and Levi. Chapter 49, beginning at verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor. Be not thou united. Look at this. For in anger they slew a man. They slew a man. Well, they slew a lot more than one man. But the man there they're talking about would be Shechem. And then, of course, his father Hamor. And then they slew all of them. And in their self-will, they dig down a wall, probably referring to how they went into the city Because the Bible says that the city had a gate, right? Well, if it has a gate, that means it has a wall too. Verse 7, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So, kind of some strange things there. You know, at one point it looks like Shechem violated her against her will. And then you keep reading and think, well, wait a minute. But did he or did he not? You know, so that, like I said, there's different views on that. But if you compare those other scriptures, you can see how the reaction and the outcome could be that based on that culture and how other people reacted in those situations as well, and what the law of Moses said. Even though the law of Moses wasn't written yet at this time, a lot of the cultural aspects carried over into the law of Moses. God said, okay, here's the culture that you're living in. Now, what was happening, there were some injustices, there were things that were not fair. Now I'm going to say this. If this happens, then there's some obligations put on you. If this happens, you got slavery is an example. Slavery was common during this time. Slavery was common all over the world at this time. And the law of Moses comes in, and God says, okay, if you guys have slaves, then you have to treat them right. They get released after a certain number of years. If you do this, this happens. If they get married, if they have kids, this happens. And a lot of people, they try to accuse the Bible of having these injustices and these monstrosities and things and being very cruel. And they will use slavery as an example. And what they are doing is they are equating slavery in the Bible to the African slave trade that occurred in recent history. They're completely different. If you study the laws and how slaves were allowed to be treated and the injustices and how unfair it was, number one, the slaves during the African slave trade, they were kidnapped and brought against their will. In the Bible, kidnapping is a capital crime. In the Bible, some people sold themselves into slavery to pay off a debt that they couldn't pay. They were like indentured servants. In the Bible, they were released after a certain number of years. So, you know, you can't equate the two and say, oh, well, here's this event that happened in our country recently, which was a terrible injustice, inhumane, and the Bible supports it. Therefore, the Bible is evil. No, they're not the same. Completely different. Here we see that culture at that time, marriage is not identical to how it is today. So, anybody have any questions on that?